When you think of an old psychiatric hospital, you probably picture a locked ward. Long corridors, doors you can't see through, really strict rules about who comes and goes. From the outside, it looks like a place of healing, of treatment. But what about the people inside? People who are completely dependent on the system. In this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain and really look at what happens when the most vulnerable among us are hidden completely from sight.
And that forces you to ask a really tough question. When a system is totally closed off from the outside world, who is it actually designed to protect? Is it the people inside, or is it the reputation of the people in charge?
Well, to get to the bottom of this, we have to go back in time to the psychiatric institutions of the mid-20th century. And you've got to understand, these places weren't just hospitals, they were their own separate worlds, completely cut off.
There's actually a term for this, total institutions, and it's exactly what it sounds like. Think about it for a minute. Every single part of your life is controlled. When you wake up, what you eat, your work, when the lights go out, all of it dictated by one authority, under one roof, and behind a wall that separates you from everyone and everything you've ever known.
And this is where you see this huge gap between what the public was told and what was actually happening. The official picture was one of order, safety, and professional care. But for the patients on the inside, the reality was often the exact opposite. It was a total loss of control, having no personal voice, and just complete, crushing isolation.
And here's the really crucial part. The things we take for granted today, like human rights or informed consent, they just weren't part of the conversation back then. People were basically stripped of their agency. They weren't seen as citizens who had rights, they were seen as cases that needed to be managed, or problems that needed to be solved. And that kind of environment, well, it's a perfect storm for things to go terribly wrong.
And they did go wrong. Because in a closed system with almost no one watching, it's dangerously easy to start pushing boundaries. What starts out looking like treatment can quietly slide into something much, much darker.
And this didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual slide. First, the rules just got stricter. Then came more aggressive procedures, stronger electroshock therapy, for example, or powerful new drug cocktails, all framed as innovative treatments. And then came the final step, the one taken in the shadows, where these so-called treatments were secretly shaped by outside experiments.
So how did this even work? Well, imagine a government agency, maybe in the US, looking for ways to control the human mind. They secretly funnel money to psychiatric research in another country, let's say Canada. And just like that, patients who walked into a clinic hoping for help with something like depression or anxiety suddenly became unknowing subjects in a secret experiment.
And the techniques they used were just extreme. I mean, we're not talking about talk therapy here. We're talking about huge doses of drugs, like LSD, being put into sensory deprivation for days at a time, being forced to listen to the same recorded messages over and over again. The goal, believe it or not, was often to completely break down a person's personality, hoping they could then rebuild it from the ground up.
For the researchers, this was all about data, about results, about protocols. But for the people on the receiving end, it was their minds, their memories, their entire lives. So now, let's talk about the real human cost of all this.
This is from someone who actually went through it. They signed papers because you trust the doctors, right? But nobody explained what that signature really meant. No one said, by the way, we might keep you awake for days on end, hold you in isolation, and give you drugs that will literally wipe out parts of your memory.
And the impact was just devastating and lifelong. This survivor talks about leaving that hospital as a completely different person. Not better, but broken. Their family collapsed. And it was only decades later that the truth came out. They hadn't just gotten bad treatment. They'd been part of a secret government research program.
And that is the profound, heartbreaking disconnect at the center of this whole story. On one side, you have scientific reports talking about cases and results. And on the other, you have human beings who lost years of their lives, whose health was destroyed, and who had their very sense of who they were stolen from them. Sooner or later, though, stories like this start to trickle out. They can't stay hidden forever. And when the truth starts to surface, the system has a very particular way of handling it. It often pulls out a tool called the independent review.
But look at how long it takes for the truth to even get that far. It is a slow, agonizing process. It starts with a few brave journalists. Then lawyers get involved. Families fight for years, sometimes over a decade, just to get access to their own medical records.
And only after all that pressure does the government finally say, okay, fine, we'll commission a review to get an objective look at this.
But how independent are these reviews really? Let's break it down. The promise is always to understand what happened, but the reality is often just to acknowledge harm. The findings might say, yes, terrible things occurred, but officials at the time acted with the information they had, or the government didn't know the full scale. And the outcome? The state's legal responsibility is limited, and the whole issue gets a big, closed stamp put on it.
Now, it's really easy to hear all this and think, well, that was a long time ago. That's ancient history. And it's true. Most of those old locked wards are gone. We've replaced them with things like community living and in-home support. We went from one big closed system to lots of smaller, spread out ones. But have the core issues of isolation, vulnerability, and lack of oversight really gone away? Or have they just taken new forms, hidden now behind the closed doors of private homes and group facilities?
And that brings us right back to where we started. After everything we've seen, everything we've learned from the horrors of the last century's locked wards, have we actually built systems that put the protection of vulnerable people first? Or, when things inevitably go wrong, does the system, through its carefully worded reports and its limited liability, still end up protecting itself first? That's the question we all need to keep asking.